Hi everyone, welcome back to Football-Oranje. It is time for our top 5 Ajax Youth Academy products. Now to do that, I need an expert. I've got Alex Dieker here. Alex, how are you? And the floor is to you. What do you do and why do you know so much about Ajax?
Good, Mike. Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it. Why do I know so much about Ajax? Well, I don't know if I would call myself an expert necessarily. Just a really big supporter over in the United States. I've been a fan ever since after the 2014 World Cup. So that I think that Dutch team definitely influenced me, pushing me towards the Eredivisie, and I've been watching Ajax ever since. So I love the beautiful football. I love, of course, the youth players who we're going to talk about. Really exciting.
Nice one, Alex. You can, of course, follow him on Twitter. What is your handle again?
Yeah, it's Alex_Dieker. That's Dieker.
Great. And Alex, without further ado, let's get into it. We've got 5 Youth Academy products here for Ajax. Players who may well follow in the footsteps, you never know, of Matthijs De Ligt, Frank de Jong, those guys who came through a few years ago. But they're not always have been with the Ajax Academy. However, there seems to be this thing about a draw towards the Ajax Academy. Why do so many players want to go and transfer to them if they haven't played with them from the very young youth ranks? I mean, I guess what makes Ajax best is they do have the money to spend on their youth academy, and they've got a team in the second tier of Dutch football, which always helps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of what I've written about over the past couple of years is how Dutch football is inherently at a disadvantage when compared with, say, Germany, France, all the top 5 and other leagues. So what that does is while it is a disadvantage in terms of not being able to sign as many star players, the clubs are forced to use a lot of their youth talent. And I think that's a phenomenon that is perhaps not solely applicable to Ajax. You mentioned the Feyenoord Academy before we started recording. That's another one. But I'd say that emphasis on youth talent is really important for a lot of these clubs. And with Ajax, you have that factor combined with the fact that the economies of scale, Ajax is so much richer than a lot of these other Dutch teams, even Feyenoord and PSV. So I think having that those finances to be able to draw in a lot of these players, as well as giving them the opportunity to potentially become one of the stars of the Toekomst or even the Ajax first team. As you know, there are so many Ajax youth players who don't end up making it into the first team, but they really set themselves up for success potentially down the line, whether that's in the Eredivisie or abroad or even going down the line into the second division in the Netherlands. I think being in the youth academy setup is something that players really don't want to pass up. So I know we're going to talk about a few players who transferred over from other Dutch teams. So I think that's something really that people should be keeping in mind.
Certainly. Well, let's get started anyway. And the first one I've got on here is a player that many Dutch football fans know in general. We haven't just got Ajax fans watching this. It will be Dutch football fans too. Nicky Univar, who's 18 now. He's been watched for a few years, though, since he was in his late teenage years. And he's a left winger. He's been playing with young Ajax in the Dutch second tier. Tell us a bit more about the kind of player he is, Alex, and why some people have been paying close attention to him.
Yeah, you hit it spot on there, Michael. He's been really at the forefront of the Ajax Academy since, I want to say since he was 14 or 15 now. So it's been quite a few years since he's been on people's radar. He is definitely one with a lot of flair. When I watch him, I think a little bit of Api Nouri, who you'll remember, obviously very tragic, what happened to him. But that same flair, that same, I guess, just overall ball control. He's the type of player when you see him, you think, okay, he might try to do something a bit eccentric. he's not always going to be completely assured on the ball, but he's going to try to do a lot of things for the team. And I think that's why you see him making a pretty big impact as, like you mentioned, Mike, a left winger. I think he could feasibly be a number 10, potentially even over on the right as well, or potentially as a false 9. But I think him being right-footed, coming in from the left side, that's really where his strong suit is. Being able to operate from that left half space, moving inside the box, gives him a lot of shooting and passing opportunities. He is, I would say, a pretty decent shooter. He scored, I believe, 7 goals in the second tier last season, despite a couple of minor injuries. So, yeah, I'd say overall, he's a pretty well-rounded talent at 18. Now, the only issue is the pure squad depth of Ajax up front this season.
So, is he set for another season with young Ajax then, considering he might not push through to the first team? Is a loan necessary? Because he's already had, I remember him having a bit of a setback around about a year ago when he was starting to come through with young Ajax and playing those games against senior players, actual grown men who are making a life for themselves. I think Univar found that a little more tricky because everything's been kind of easy for him coming through the youth academy, and it sort of hit him all of a sudden. But he did go on to play a lot of games for young Ajax last season. So, is he set for another year of that, or can he start to push through to the first team?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of impossible to say, but I think he played, looking at my notes, I think he played around 1,600 minutes for young Ajax last season. So definitely not a full season by any measure. So I do think he would do well to stay in young Ajax's setup, hopefully starting as many games as possible and getting the odd maybe cup or league substitution during the season. But yeah, especially with Berghuis now coming in, potentially maybe 1 or 2 more attackers when the summer transfer window comes to a close. Unsure at the moment, but of course with Tadic out on the left wing, it's going to be very difficult for him to break in and get any sort of serious minutes in the first team. You mentioned a loan. I think it would depend. I'm a bit hesitant to recommend a loan, only because having watched a lot of the transfer activity that the Ajax youth management goes for, typically you don't see these top players in terms of prospects going out on loan, and I think that is because the leadership wants to see that development within the club. But by no means would it be unheard of to send Univar out on loan. I think it would make sense to send him to potentially a team in around the middle or lower portion of the Eredivisie, just to get him that top tier action. You mentioned him struggling a little bit coming into senior football. I think that's why at 18, I don't think it's bad to just keep him at young Ajax for the season and just see where it goes from there.
Yeah, definitely. And as well, it's in a more physical second tier too, which might be important for his growth. Let's talk about another 18-year-old actually that's on the edges of the first team, just like Univar. He's impressed a lot in pre-season. He's a midfielder who plays kind of deep in midfield. Fitzym. I hope I said his name right. I know that he's not always been in the Ajax academy, but coming from RZ, he's now developing with that Ajax second team. Tell us a bit more about him, because he has definitely raised the attention, his name.
Yeah, no, I think you got the pronunciation spot on there, Mike. Fitzym, I would say he's, like you said, he's 18, same age as Univar. He wasn't really on too many people's radars until recently. He did have a pretty great preseason, and he, having watched just some clips from him and taking some time to analyze his play, he is probably one of my favorite players coming through the youth ranks at this point. He's so assured on the ball. I mentioned how Univar is he's really like a number 10 winger type player, where he's not going to hold on to the ball assuredly all the time. He's going to try to do some fantastic things which may or may not pan out. Fitzym in midfield, he's really kind of the polar opposite of that in a sense, where he's really trying his best to keep a hold of the ball as much as possible, not doing perhaps the spectacular, but really just trying to be that main creative force driving his team. So building off of that, whether his position is a 6 or an 8, potentially even a 10, I'm not really sure at this point. He has he played in a double pivot the other day against Ado in young Ajax's first game of the season, and I think he does pretty well in that sort of controlling role where he is able to drop deep, get close to the defensive line, receive some passes, and honestly, I don't want to make a Frankie de Jong comparison because I think it's a little bit too early for that, but just purely in terms of style of play and the way he attracts that pressure, I think he's someone that it clicks in my head. Oh, that's a move that Frankie would make. You know, that's a way that Frankie would contort his body and feint right and then pivot left, and before you know it, he's surpassed 2 or 3 defenders and he's created all of this space for his teammates. So yeah, I think he's just really certainly someone to watch. Like Univar, there are certainly questions about whether he'll get a lot of game time this season. I think he really only broke through young Ajax around December or January last year, so he didn't get more than a half season of football in the second tier. So
he needs a full season in that team.
Yeah, I would really watch for him to get a full season this year. Perhaps with a cup game here and there would be really nice. But with Gravenberch and Kenneth Taylor coming in, there really aren't too many open options in midfield. But fingers crossed. Like I said, he has to be one of the most talented players in the academy at this point.
Yeah, definitely, and that's of course not including players like Gravenberch or Ench who have made their way to the first team. You know, these are the guys that are coming next, and with that sort of player you mentioned, maybe Fitzym's going to be fitting in sooner than we think. There's another person who's also 18, he's also Dutch, and he's also on the edge of the Ajax first team, mainly because of the position he plays. But left back YURI, he was a regular at the end of last season with young Ajax, but already with we won't get into too much of the situation with Tagliafico, but there could be a positioning opening up at left back, even if it's second choice. Mm-hmm. So yeah, tell us more about him and why is he suddenly first team worthy?
Yeah, so Boss, very interesting player. You mentioned him being really on the cusp of the first team. I would agree with that. He has beat out competition from a couple of other youth players at the left back position, which I think is a great sign. He came through young Ajax, I want to say around the same time as Fitzym. So he's had around a half season of second tier football. So with Boss, I would look for him to have that full season where he really grows into himself as not only a defender, but someone moving forward. Boss certainly could be the player to come in there, perhaps get some game time off the bench. In terms of himself as a player, really interesting. I remember writing a couple of articles back in the day about Mitchell Bakker, who you'll remember left for PSG a few seasons back before even, I'm not even sure if he made his competitive debut for the first team before he did that. And now he's playing in Champions League finals for PSG. So Bakker was also a left back, which is why I'm mentioning him. He is, I'd say, a bit more defensively oriented than YURI Boss is at this stage in his career, at least. So when I look at Boss, I see someone who is really competent going forward. Defensively, that's where there may be a few more question marks. He came to the Ajax Academy from Excelsior, actually, which is pretty interesting, a couple of years ago. And in an interview with the Ajax website, I believe, he said he really models his game after Marcelo, who is, of course, probably the most attacking fullback perhaps in world football at the moment. So really, when I've been watching Boss, that quote rings true. He's very, very competent going forward. He is someone who, and this is of course a product of the Ajax tactics, but he's going to push up and stay relatively high and wide. So he's really acting as a left winger in most phases of the build-up. So what this does is it allows whoever is on the left wing position to come in, tuck inside, and then there's a numerical advantage when young Ajax or even the Ajax first team in preseason are building up on the left side. So with that said, he is a pretty good passer. He's actually very good at crossing. I've seen a lot of his even first touch crosses just loop right over the defensive line, perfectly right at the 6-yard box for his intended target. So I think he has a great left foot. So I would say moving forward, he's probably someone to look out for, making those incisive runs down the left flank. Perhaps he could form some form of really nice combination with Tadic, someone who Erik ten Hag loves him on the left side. He'll tuck in a little bit. With Boss coming down the left flank, there should be an opportunity for him to get down to the byline and make a pretty dangerous cross. But like I said, I think the big question mark and something that he'll probably iron out a little bit this season with young Ajax is that defensive tracking, making sure he's getting back on time, and just overall making sure his positioning in the box when he's defending is good, and then maybe cutting out 1 or 2 errors that I noticed. But so I would say overall he's very good as an attacking fullback going forward, someone definitely to look out for.
Yeah, it sounds like if he gets a chance with Ajax, it will be in a game where they're maybe at home and they're against a lower opposition, and his attacking qualities are definitely more needed. Yeah, let's see how he develops young Ajax in this season, and certainly the name to keep our eye on. The next one is someone who's only just joined Ajax. So this is a bit of a curveball, whether he should be in here or not. But someone who's developing with Ajax Academy, the Ajax first team, is Jay Horto, who's a 21-year-old goalkeeper who's only just signed from Go Ahead Eagles. He was a regular in the Dutch second tier last season with Go Ahead, winning promotion. And he had such a great debut, even though they lost to Ardo. He was making so many saves. Tell us why you thought that he should be in a sort of our top 5 Ajax Youth Academy products.
Yeah, so I wasn't going to include him, as you mentioned, just because he recently joined. But when I looked into it, he was actually in the Ajax Academy, I believe, from around age 10 to 14. So
that's including them.
Exactly. So some pretty pivotal years of development, I'd say. So he left, I believe he left for AFC Amsterdam, the semi-pro amateur side, and then he joined AZ's Academy before moving to Go Ahead Eagles, as you mentioned. Last season in the second tier, he had 23 clean sheets, which I believe was it might have been a league record, actually. So just some absolute top tier performances from him. He, like you said, against Ado earlier in the week, he even though he conceded 2 goals, he was really, really phenomenal, made some brilliant saves. I think a lot of Ajax fans on Twitter are calling for him to start over Stekelenburg or Pasveer, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon. But you really never know if Ten Hag decides that.
You're right, yeah.
Both of them aren't necessarily performing that well. 36 and 37 years old. I think someone, Horto at 21 years old, I believe, coming in, has a lot more upside, a lot more potential to be a first teamer in the future. So I would say it's going to be difficult for him this season, but coming in, he told the Ajax website interviewer that he knows it's going to be difficult, but every goalkeeper has a chance, and if you perform, then you'll be the one that ends up playing. So I think based on his performances last season, and of course the game earlier this week that I mentioned, if he keeps up that form, I wouldn't be surprised to see him hopefully at least get some Dutch Cup matches. Whether that turns into anything in the league is still a question mark, but I would probably look out for him to become the starter for Ajax within 2 maybe 3 seasons before he would potentially look for somewhere else. But just speaking purely in terms of him as a player, I'm a pretty tall person, so whenever I play rec league, I'm usually put in goal because my teammates know I can't really handle the ball very well. But I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a great analyst of professional goalkeepers. It's so technical. There's so much that goes into it. But just based on my purely analysis from a supporter, of course he's a phenomenal shot stopper. I don't need to tell anyone that. His positioning is great. He never looks like he's getting caught out at any moment. Even when there are a couple of one-on-one chances with him, he's very good at making himself big. He's coming out. He's known to use his feet for some saves as well. So I would say very competent in that area. My question would be, how does he fit in with the Ajax build-up play? The goalkeeper, as Cruyff always said, is really the first attacker. So he needs to be very good with his feet, has to have that tactical know-how to understand where the openings are going to come, especially when you get teams potentially like PSV and Feyenoord, but especially in some of the European games where these really phenomenal defensive units are going to be pushing forward, pressing against the Ajax defense, where there perhaps is not very much leeway when Horto has the ball to pass. So that's what I would look out for, and I think that's probably what Ten Hag is going to look out for as well. So that's going to be the question mark for me, but really has to be one of the most phenomenal shot stoppers I've seen in recent years.
Let's hope that he can take a good, clear path to the first team then once he spent a year or two with Ajax, because Kels Herpen was unable to do that. Let's see what Horto can bring then. And if he can make it to the first team, you heard it here first. Lastly, we've got a Danish player who's in the academy, Jeppe Kjær, who's 17, and he came from Horsens in Denmark. He's a winger. Tell us more about him and why you chose him to be within our 5 academy products, considering he's the youngest of the 5 that we chose.
Yeah, I think he's the youngest, and he's probably the biggest question mark out of these players, only because he hasn't really had a full season with the Ajax Youth Academy. I think a lot of the matches were either postponed or canceled because of COVID, so the under-18s didn't really find their feet, so to say, in the 2021 season. So a lot of my analysis of him comes from his time at Horsens. I think he's going to stay probably mostly in the under-18s this season, but I would really love to see him perhaps be maybe like a Fitzym player, like we talked about, coming in halfway through the season if he performs really well with the under-18s to get that senior football that is so crucial to their development. He's, I would say, mostly a right winger, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him shifted around the front line a little bit. He's left-footed, and he has a really strong left foot. So much power on his shots, and not only that, but very good placement from what I've seen with his crosses and his passes. He's someone who always looking to make those incisive runs from out wide towards the center, which I think is really one of the best ways for a player of his stature to create that space and continue that momentum for a shot from outside the box. Like I said, he's probably the biggest question mark at this point, just because he hasn't played that many matches in the Netherlands, but he seems to be very physically fit. Like I said, phenomenal left foot. So I'd definitely be watching him for some potential young Ajax appearances this season, and hopefully breaking into the first team perhaps within 2, maybe 3 seasons.
Cool. Well, yeah, he's a bit further down the line, but someone who you can keep an eye on. Alex, thank you very much for doing this for us here at Football-Oranje, and of course you can still go and follow him on Twitter, see what he's up to online. Alex, thank you very much, and some exciting times ahead for Ajax.
Yeah, totally. Thanks again, Mike. Always a pleasure chatting with you. And we'll look forward to some more chats during the season.